Hello and welcome. So today is a big day at LangChain. Today we have GA'd LangSmith. So thank you all for coming to join. My name is Julia Schottenstein. I lead go-to-market here, and I'm joined by Ankush, who's co-founder of LangChain. And today Ankush is going to be demoing and showing off all the new capabilities of LangSmith. And we really thought about this product to be helpful in all phases of your development lifecycle. So specifically, we'll spend some time on what it's like to prototype your app, how LangSmith can help, how getting to beta phase, LangSmith will also be useful. And then hopefully when you hit the promised land of GA, LangSmith will get you there too, even faster than you could without it. So just some rules of engagement. Feel free to ask questions in the chat, and I will read them out loud and interrupt Ankush at appropriate times, but we want to make this interactive. So thank you all for joining. And with that, I'll turn it over to Ankush to say hello.
Hey everyone, I'm Ankush, co-founder of LangChain. Really excited to be here and demo LangSmith for you all. And yeah, if no other intros needed, I'm happy to get started and dive right into it. Okay, awesome. Yeah, so today we're super excited to launch the general availability of LangSmith. As most of you are aware, LangSmith is our platform for LLM application development, monitoring, and testing. Here I'll give a quick overview of LangSmith and dive into all the features that LangSmith supports and how they relate to each phase of the LLM application development lifecycle, specifically prototyping, beta testing, and even production. So with that being said, here I've logged into LangSmith. I am part of the LangChain organization, and I can see a few different sections on the homepage. I see projects, I see data sets and testing, annotation queues in the hub. I'll first dive into projects. I'll preface this by saying projects are nothing more than collections of traces that you're sending to LangSmith. And usually what we see people do is map a single application to a single project. So you can have each project represent or be a collection of traces for a specific application. So here I can see all the projects that I have and the statistics that are associated with each project in each row. I'll dive into the Chat LangChain project. Some of you might be aware that we have an application that's deployed on chat.langchain.com. It's an LLM-powered application built with LangChain that is designed to answer questions about LangChain's Python documentation. And so you can ask it questions, you can submit feedback, and get your questions answered about LangChain's Python documentation. And we have all the traces set up to log to LangSmith under the Chat LangChain project. So here I'll just highlight a few quick attributes that you can see as part of the project. So you can see the total run count for the past 7 days, which is the default time period. You can see total tokens, the cost associated with the tokens. So we have token-based cost tracking. Currently, this is only available for OpenAI models, but support for all of the other models is on the roadmap for the near future. We have median tokens, some statistics about error rates and streaming, latency, time to first token, and then we have some filter shortcuts that allow you to filter by a number of different attributes, which I can dive into later. So what we can do is expand a trace by clicking on a single row in the project details page. So a trace is an end-to-end invocation of your application. So in this case, we're looking at a trace for the LLM pipeline that backs Chat LangChain. And you can see all the different steps that the system takes to arrive at the final answer. So at the top level, you'll see the high-level input and the final output. But if you dive into any of the intermediate steps, you can see exactly what happens at that level. I'll dive into the most interesting ones. So I'll dive into the retriever step here. In this case, we are doing a retrieval step. We're going into an index and retrieving documents based on a query. How do we use a recursive URL loader to load content from a page? And then we have a generation step that uses an LLM. So here, if you look at metadata, you can see all of the different invocation params and like the model name and other helpful information like your runtime information. And you can inspect the raw prompt. So here we see like the system message. We can look at the human message and the final AI output. If we did have feedback for this run, we would see it here, but we don't. I'll actually dive into feedback right now. So when you submit a thumbs up or thumbs down score with Chat LangChain, we actually have that wired up to a specific feedback key called user score that shows up in LangSmith. So when we filter by feedback key, we see all of the traces or all of the application invocations that resulted in a positive user score. And we could, obviously like use the same principle to filter for traces that have a negative user score. This is really useful when it comes time to understand how your application is doing in real-world scenarios. And it can also help you construct data sets that allow you to test future versions of your application. So before I go into data sets and testing, I'll just highlight a few more things in the project details page. So we had talked about the trace. We talked about feedback. We talked about metadata. One thing that I'll highlight is we also have a tab that allows you to see only LLM calls isolated. So if you're only interested in the raw prompts and the generations, you can find all of these in the LLM calls tab. We also have a monitoring section, and this allows you to see different metrics for your project over time. So you can see the trace count over time. You can see the LLM call count, a bunch of other helpful metrics, LLM latency, tokens per second. You'll see feedback metrics here. And yep, this is what you'll find in the monitoring section. You can also group by metadata, and this allows you to look at different versions of your application and how they're performing side by side. One other thing I'll highlight is it's super easy to get. Yep,
on the traces, the visibility was really clean. What if I'm not using LangChain as the underlying logic for my application? How will my traces get displayed?
Yeah, that's a good question. So they get displayed exactly the same way. You can use either LangSmith's Python SDK, LangSmith's TypeScript SDK, or even our API to log traces to LangSmith, and you can have the traces show up the exact same way, whether or not you're using LangChain. So you have a lot of control over how you can send traces up to the system and how they display as well. Cool. One thing I'll mention, I guess, like one thing that's important to talk about is why is this important? Like why is it even useful to have tracing, and how does it help? Well, when you're starting off prototyping an LLM application, you can run into a lot of like really frustrating issues. You can run into infinite loops if you're using an agentic workflow. You can run into issues where your LLM pipeline is using more tokens than expected. And then you can also just, in general, be seeing very wrong or concerning output at the end of your pipeline. And you can even isolate these outputs by doing what we did before, by filtering for traces that have bad feedback associated with them. And so oftentimes when you have these issues, it's really hard to root cause them if you can't see what's happening in your LLM pipeline step by step. So by doing so, you can really get a a close understanding of the inputs and outputs at each step and isolate any issues that you see with the final response. So one thing that I alluded to earlier is, I guess before I dive into that, I think it would be helpful to showcase the prompt playground. So one other thing that's useful when you're prototyping your application is rapid iteration and rapid experimentation. So let's say, you're at this LLM call, and then you see like the system message, human message, the output, and let's say you want to mess around with the prompt or other parameters associated with the application. Okay, I guess in this case, we hit a token limit. So let me try to open up another trace. Try to find a good one. Yeah, so you can actually edit your prompt and edit any parameters that are associated with the model, and then you can see how they affect the generation. So this playground environment that we have here is super useful for rapid iteration and rapid prototyping. We have a number of different models available in the playground, and actually 2 of them are free. So we offer Google Palm and Fireworks for free. And we have a number of different model types within each provider. If you're using Azure OpenAI, we support that as well.
Hey, Ankush, I'm seeing some tools in the playground. Do you want to talk a little bit about how tools can be used?
Yeah, definitely. So let me back up a bit here. When you're using, I guess if you're building like an agentic system that relies on your model using like function calls, returning function calls, you can also play around with that in the playground. So basically, if you have an agentic system and you supply the model with some functions, so a number of models now like support function calling, you can, the model will output the function and the arguments that it wants to invoke, and this is also supported in the playground environment. Cool. Should I move on to data sets and testing now? Any other questions?
Yeah, we had one question in the chat about whether we support Azure OpenAI in the playground, and the answer is yes, we do. You just have to supply your own proxy and token, but we have a lot of variability there.
Cool. Awesome. Okay, so let me dive into the data sets and testing section. So let me preface this and ground this a bit. Let me first find examples. So oftentimes when you're building an LLM application, you'll want to not only rely on vibe checks before you deploy it to an initial set of test users, you'll want to create a benchmarking set and then run some tests against the benchmarking set that you've created. So we've followed like a similar idea here with this example. So we have a data set here called chat LangChain complex questions, and then this data set has a list of examples associated with it. Each example is nothing more than an input and a reference output that you can use to ground the results of your LLM pipeline. So once you've assembled a list of a list of examples in a data set, you can run tests against the data set. And so we offer a capability to do this with the Python and the TypeScript SDK. There's also a way to do that with the API. And once you've run a series of tests over a data set, you'll see all of the test results in the test section of that data set. We offer a chart that shows different metrics for all of your test results. So you can easily see how your test results are performing relative to each other. And we made this pretty flexible. So each test can be, you could label it according to something that's useful for you to understand, like at a high level, I guess like what's specific to that test result. These can be GitHub revisions for an LLM pipeline. You can also tag it with commit messages and things like that. And you can also see a bunch of different metrics. In this case, we're looking at correctness here. And so when you run a test, what you can do with the Python and the TypeScript SDK is configure a set of evaluators to score the results of your tests. These can be a combination of LLM or heuristic-based evaluators. We offer a number of evaluators in the LangChain library that you can use off the shelf. These are evaluators that can score the results of your tests on a number of criteria, such as correctness. I think we have a vagueness criteria evaluator, helpfulness criteria evaluator, things like that. And obviously, as I mentioned earlier, this is completely configurable. So all you need to do is write a function that takes in an input, an output, and a reference output, and then submits a score based on those inputs. And then the results will show up in the datasets and testing section for that test result. You can dive in and look at an individual test result. This gives you a good overview of the input, the reference output, and the actual output of your application. You can also open up a test run comparison view that allows you to see the results of multiple tests side by side. So this is really useful if you want to track regressions across multiple revisions of your application. We've also added some charts to get a quick overview about how your tests are performing. This is completely configurable. In this case, we just have one feedback tag associated with this chart. But if you have multiple feedback tags that are associated with different evaluators, you'll see the results of those here. We can also look at the latency, the token usage, and then we have these distribution charts as well that allow you to see how the different test results are stacking alongside each other.
Hey, Ankush, how would you make a recommendation for folks on creating evals using off-the-shelf evaluators that we have in LangSmith versus custom evaluators that they can also craft? Any guidance you want to share?
Yeah, that's a good question. So I think one thing that I'll point out is that evaluation is very use case specific. And so oftentimes off-the-shelf evaluators are a good starting point, but they likely won't be enough for you to get an in-depth understanding about how the application is performing relative to criteria that's important to you and your organization. So one of the key benefits of having your tracing system and your evaluation system in the same place, which is what LangSmith offers, is it allows you to grow your data sets, your benchmarking data sets over time with real data. So when you initially deploy your application to a set of test users, you might only be testing your application on a few examples that you've come up with your head, or a few examples that you've seen while running your application. However, when you submit your application to an initial set of beta testers, you're getting a really good idea of how your application is performing in real world scenarios. So a common workflow we see is for users to go in and drill down into traces that receive either very good feedback from users or really poor feedback from the users, and this can be something that is wired up to a thumbs up, thumbs down button, or a comment box or something similar, and then it helps the user draw attention to the most interesting data points from what they've collected by rolling out to an initial set of test users. And then you start to develop an intuition for how your application is breaking down on certain inputs and how it's breaking down. And this allows you to, as I mentioned earlier, not only craft examples that you can use to test further versions of your application, but also gain an intuition for what heuristics or what LLM-based evals you want to run in the future to defend against the problems that you're seeing in that specific version. I don't know if that's helpful or if that specifically answers the question, but that's kind of how I think about evaluation with LangSmith.
Great, yeah, that helps. And how are people using, how do you see people doing evaluation if they're not using LangSmith? Like what's maybe the before state?
Yeah, we've seen a lot of teams run, collect data in spreadsheets, and it's not like very collaborative in that sense, and it's very I guess like rudimentary in a sense. And I think one of the key benefits, and then the other struggle that we've seen is, once you have like an initial spreadsheet, how does it get updated with data that you're seeing in the wild, right? Like how are those benchmarking sets evolving over time? And LangSmith, I think it solves both those problems because it gives you like a central place where all of your data sets live and grow over time. And then since it's also connected to your tracing/logging system, you can very easily port data from your real production traces to your benchmarking data sets. Another thing I'll point out is datasets don't only have to be used for evaluation. They can also be used to improve your application. So we can use datasets for things like few-shot prompting, and we've also seen a couple of teams use LangSmith datasets for fine-tuning. So this is something that we'll probably invest some more resources in, like building better workflows for few-shot prompting and fine-tuning in the near future.
And maybe one final question before we move on from testing. When are people testing in LangSmith? Looks like this is offline evaluation. When do you recommend in your workflow that you should, build your data set, run your evaluation tests? Is it pre-prod, post-prod? And how do I prevent regressions from making it into my production application?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think I would like to see a future where people run tests for their LLM pipelines in CI/CD. Obviously, there are some, there are some blockers right now for people to be doing that. One is if you're using LLM-based evals, they can be like pretty expensive to run. The other thing is oftentimes we've seen that LLM-based evals to score your results aren't always accurate in a sense. So it takes a good bit of human review to look at the results and really understand, whether or not the result of the evaluator is actually what you want. So right now, the recommendation is to test as much as possible, but with these two things in mind, that if you run evaluations, if you run tests that use LLM-based evaluations too often, it can be expensive. And then the other thing is oftentimes you'll need human review on the LLM as a judge results that run against your test results. Cool. And I guess one thing I'll also mention is the concept of online evaluation. So here I've talked about offline evaluation, which is running your LLM pipeline against a data set, and then running a combination of heuristic and LLM-based evals to score the results of your tests. But oftentimes it's also really useful to run automatic evaluations on your production data. So LangSmith provides, let me just dive into the projects view again, a mechanism for you to annotate your run. So you can submit feedback on a particular trace. This can be done at any level of the trace. So for example, if the overall output of your LM pipeline looks good, you might want to give it like a correctness score of 1. You can also add a number of tags that you can use to score your pipeline. These are tags that are like associated with your tenant, and you can add new tags as you see fit. But sometimes it's really useful to actually look into an individual run. In this case, I'm in the retrieval step, and then you can annotate the retrieval step separately. So basically, if your overall output was bad and you traced it down to your retrieval step, like it's not returning the right documents based on the query, you can actually go in and annotate the retrieval step separately. And then you can query for traces that have poor retrieval feedback, and see how that impacted the overall result. So getting back to online evaluations, in addition to running automatic evals offline on your test results, what we're working on right now is a way to configure evaluators to run on a sample of your traffic. So the interface for this will look something like run a vagueness evaluator on 20% of my downvoted traces. And so what that will allow you to do is get a really good sense of how your application is doing in production on real data with respect to the criteria that's important to you and your organization. So the evaluation step doesn't just stop at testing or the CI step. It's something that carries into deploying your application to production. Awesome. One quick thing I'll point out is we also offer a workflow called the annotation queue. So you can add any trace to an annotation queue, and you can then go into the annotation queue and look at each trace that you've submitted to the annotation queue one by one and review them in a cyclical manner. So this is really helpful when you want a really focused view for evaluation and annotation. And we're actually working on a permissioning system that allows you to mark certain users as annotators, and so they can go in and access the annotation queue and annotate the results that you're getting in your projects, in your tracing projects. Cool.
We had one more question on testing I want to hit. So the question was, how many tests are needed, generally speaking?
Yeah, that's a question that's kind of hard to answer. I think what we've seen from teams that we work with is when they're initially launching a version of their application, it's around 20 examples to get to gain some confidence in their application. But we've also seen teams that run their LM pipelines against multiple data sets, each data set having 20 to 50 examples, sometimes more. So it can really vary based on the team, how much time you're willing to spend on evaluation or testing, and I guess like how expensive it is to run your evaluators and score your results of your tests. So it really varies.
Yeah, and just to add, I think what we've seen people do in LangSmith is dramatically grow their testing coverage. And Ankush stated the before world where it was a lot of manual tests and spreadsheets. Most teams have some kind of internal tooling maybe that they've built or it's imperfect. What we've heard is that LangSmith allows you to add the incremental test more easily with less effort, which results in higher quality production applications.
Yep. Awesome. One thing that's helpful for production is monitoring. That's something that I demoed in the when I was demoing the tracing projects. But every project has this monitoring tab, and I don't know if I mentioned this before, but it's useful sometimes to deploy multiple versions of your application to production. And there are multiple ways to do this. You can route traffic to a specific version of your application, or you can have a single version of your application that everyone hits, and you can have a shadow pipeline running such that the input gets sent to your main application, but also your shadow pipeline. Your shadow pipeline might have some changes relative to the retrieval strategy or the prompt or the model. But anyways, at the end of the day, you could have multiple versions of your application running and accepting production data. And we've done that with LangChain, and we have like multiple models serving traffic and generating responses. And this is really, I guess the monitoring section and being able to group my metadata is really useful for being able to understand how different versions of your application are doing side by side. So it allows you to A/B test different configurations of your application. So yeah, this could. I mean, right now we're looking at different models, but these can be different prompts, different retrieval strategies. It can be like look back window length, things like that. So it really depends. There's so many different knobs that you can dial and change in your LLM pipeline, and being able to A/B test all of them at the same time can be useful. So at the end of the day, all of these features that we've supplied in LangSmith allow you to not only gain observability in your data, but answer the question, am I getting better over time, or am I doing worse over time? So that's really what we're building towards here.
Yeah, because we had a couple questions on open source models. Do we support it in LangSmith? And can you see the full capabilities like token tracking, as well as multimodal or multilingual applications? How is that supported in LangSmith?
Yes, so we support basically all. You can use any model you'd like and get that to trace, get that to render correctly in LangSmith. This is regardless of whether or not you're using LangChain. LangChain has a bunch of wrappers around open source models. But if you're not using LangChain, you can still use our SDK, and we have a few examples in our docs about how to send up LLM runs that allow your run to. We actually do token counting in the back end, so you don't have to send the tokens up to LangSmith. We'll do a best effort token count, so you can still get that information saved in the back end, and you can view it in the UI. For multimodal, we do support multimodal. I don't think I have a multimodal trace pulled up here, but if you're using the GPT-4 vision model and you're sending a base64 encoded image or an image URL as your input, and you're asking a question about the image, that will show up in line with your trace in the LLM run.
And I just dropped a link to a blog as well for multimodal RAG examples. And if you click in there, there should be some public links to how LangSmith handles multimodal models.
Awesome. All right. I'll just quickly dive into the prompt hub, which we launched a while ago, but I think it's worth mentioning again. And then I'm happy to answer any more questions about LangSmith. So the prompt hub is a solution that we offer as part of LangSmith that allows you to manage your prompts and view prompts that other people submit to the system. So here you can see a combination of public prompts, and then you can filter for prompts by different tags and use cases. So you can see prompts for agents, chatbots, so on and so forth. You can also see prompts that are specific to your tenant. Some of these are public, and you can try out any prompt in a playground environment. We were able to open up the playground environment from an LLM run by clicking in on a trace and then going down to the LLM run and then opening that LLM run in the playground. But you could also get to the playground by opening up a prompt from the prompt hub in the playground. And this prompt has different variables. You can input the variables, and then you could run a completion just like you did in the playground environment from the LLM call. We're actually doing some work to consolidate the playground environment so that it's accessible as soon as you enter LangSmith. But right now, these are the two ways to get to the experimental or the playground, the iterative, which gives you an iterative kind of environment to test your prompts and your model configurations.
How do you expect people to work in the playground? Do you expect developers to only be crafting prompts, or how does this help you collaborate with other team members?
Yeah, so there isn't really a good solution right now for team prompt management. A lot of people use a number of different templating libraries, and they also store their prompts in GitHub and other version control systems. I think while that works, we've seen a lot of companies want to offer a solution that makes it easy for people with non-technical backgrounds to go in and edit and deploy prompts, and play around with prompts in a playground environment, and iterate on versions of prompts. And that's kind of the solution that we're moving towards with the prompt playground. We still have a lot of work to do, but we want to make it as easy as possible for people with non-technical backgrounds to use the prompt hub. So yeah, I don't know does that kind of answer the question? Anything you wanted to add there, Julia?
Yeah, I think what we've been seeing a lot is that developers are the ones that are building the full orchestration systems, making sure the testing and evaluation and monitoring is all running smoothly. But a lot of times you need to collaborate with subject matter experts. Maybe you're writing a prompt for the legal industry, and your engineering team work closely with someone in the legal profession to get a vibe check or make sure that the quality is as expected. And so what we've seen a lot of teams do is use the prompt hub as a way for non-developers, subject matter experts, to contribute to the LLM app development process. And I think, with all things that are being used in the real world, it takes collaboration between builders and end users. And so this is a really fantastic way that you can bring more people along for the ride in the prompt hub.
Yep, that's well said.
And then we have some other questions on public prompts versus private prompts. Can I just have prompt hub for my team? Can I integrate with other tools such as GitHub? How do you suggest teams to work on prompts?
Yeah. So yeah, you can submit prompts that are private to your organizational tenant or your personal tenant. any prompt that you submit can either be private or public. So if it's private, only members of your tenant can see it. If it's public, anyone can see it. How does this integrate with GitHub? Right now, it doesn't. We have like an SDK that allows you to pull and push prompts to the hub right now. So we don't have an integration with GitHub, although that could be something interesting that we work on. We're also working to support a lot of different types of prompt templates. So we've seen teams use handlebars and mustache alongside other templating libraries for prompts. So we want to support all of those. And as Julia mentioned, we want the prompt hub to evolve into a system that makes it really easy to manage and experiment with prompts, regardless of whether or not you're a developer or a PM or someone on a marketing or sales team. So we want to lower the barrier to entry and make working with LLMs and prompts less scary. And we also want to actually offer native integration with our testing and benchmarking workflow. So right now in the prompt playground, you can only run a single prompt, but we would like to build up the capability for you to run a data set in the playground, and this allows you to, this lowers the barrier of entry for testing as well.
So we had a really good question around, I'm going to combine two questions we had in the chat. One is, how is your application code, whether it's written in LangChain or not, synced up with the traces in LangSmith? Like, how do you wire it up? And does LangSmith or Hub add any additional latency that we should be aware of?
Yeah, so let me answer the first question. We actually updated our docs a bit to make this more clear, but we have a quick start guide that you can follow to understand how you can use the Python SDK, the TypeScript SDK, or the API to submit traces to LangSmith. So if you're using LangChain, it's very easy. You just export a couple of environment variables, and then you run your application as you normally would. If you're using the Python SDK, let me actually go into a more in-depth guide here. If you're using the Python SDK, we offer a number of different ways for you to log things to LangSmith. You can use our run tree API, which allows you to build up traces and spans in a tree-like format and then send them up to the LangSmith backend. We also offer a decorator that you can use to decorate your functions, and this would turn them into individual spans within a trace, and it allows you to submit traces to the system. We also have an OpenAI wrapper that you can import and then wrap the OpenAI client. And then this client that you've wrapped will now have all the same functionality as the OpenAI client, but with the added benefit of having all of your inputs and outputs logged to LangSmith. If you're using TypeScript, we offer a couple of ways to log traces. There is this run tree API that I just showed that works with Python as well. But we also recently launched just today actually. Let me see. Yeah, this traceable function that allows you to wrap any arbitrary function and have it logged to LangSmith. So I'll update the docs to include this in the core functionality how-to guide as well. But this is something that we just released today. So we're constantly working on lowering the barrier to entry for using LangSmith. And it's a completely independent system for LangChain. So you can get all the benefits of LangSmith regardless of whether or not you're using LangChain. Obviously, we strive to have seamless support with LangChain, but we also want everyone to benefit from LangSmith regardless of whether or not they're using LangChain. And then if you're using the API, We have the API docs here, actually. And all of the functionality that you see in the UI, in the SDK with LangSmith is available in the API. So this includes logging traces, querying for statistics, querying for runs, creating projects, things like that.
Thanks. And then how about latency? How is it wired up such that LangSmith doesn't add additional latency to your application? And then maybe speak about the hub specifically, where if you decide to pull in prompts.
Yeah, so we're going to answer the latency question first. Everything is logged in the background. So if you're using the SDK and if you're using LangChain, setting up tracing to LangSmith will not impact the latency of your application. Additionally, if LangSmith is down for whatever reason, it will also not affect your application. If you want to use the prompt hub, you can pull in prompts using, so we have some documentation here on Quick Start and how to use the hub, but it's really easy to create a handle, start using the hub, commit, and then all you need to do is install LangChain and LangChain Hub, configure some environment variables, and then you can pull objects from the hub and start using prompts that are available in the hub in your application code.
Yeah, and just to call out, I think people like Prompt Hub for a number of reasons. One, it is a way to collaborate with non-engineers, which we mentioned. And two, as GitMax says in the chat, it makes code a lot cleaner. What we see a lot of teams doing today is littering their code with a lot of prompt text. This gives you a nice UI to store and version it. It's not backed by GitHub, but we've created our own versioning system. There's a unique commit SHA for every prompt, so you can pull in an exact version and pin it to not change, and it really helps people test and iterate over their prompt construction, because that often is a big driver for code quality and application performance. Kush, I know we're getting to the end here. Maybe what's next for LangSmith, or how do you think about the workflows that we want to enable? What are some of the things the team's thinking about and should keep an eye out for in the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we actually wrote up a blog post about the general availability of LangSmith and our recent fundraise. And here you can get a good idea of the different workflows that LangSmith supports at each step of the LLM application development lifecycle and how they fit in with each other. And at the end, we have the road ahead. So what's next for LangSmith? Well, we want more native support for regression testing. So we want to be able to integrate LangSmith with CI and CD pipelines such that you can run LangSmith tests in GitHub Actions or in GitLab or whichever CI tool you're using. And we also want to make it very simple for people to go in and make corrections for scores that were submitted by LLM evaluators. As I mentioned earlier, one pain point that we've seen when running tests for LLM pipelines and using LLM-based evals is that they're not always correct. So we want to streamline this process by making it very easy to hook up LangSmith tests in CI/CD, and then also streamline the process of making corrections that result, make corrections to LLM-based evaluator scores. The second thing is, I mentioned this earlier, but the ability to run online evaluators on a sample of your production data. So we're actually working on this right now, and you'll be able to configure an online evaluator in a very simple manner, such that you can do things like run a vagueness or repetitiveness LLM-based evaluator on let's say 20% of your downvoted production traces. The next thing that I'll point out is better filtering and conversation support. So this is a new interface that we want to provide in LangSmith. When you have a chat-based application and you've hooked it up to LangSmith, each invocation of the chatbot will actually log a new trace to LangSmith. And currently, you can group all of these traces together by sending in a particular metadata key value and then filtering on that metadata key value. So you can send up in the metadata payload something like conversation ID, and then have the value be the ID of the conversation that's going on with the chatbot. And then if you filter on that, you can look at all of the traces that result that are a part of that conversation. However, this is a bit of a cumbersome workload, and we don't want people to have to think about conversation IDs and filtering for them, so on and so forth. So what we're working on is a more native experience for people to view their chatbot history without having to perform an additional filtering step. So this is something that's in the works. The other thing that we're working on is the ability to deploy LLM-based applications that you build with LangChain in hosted LangServe. So more to come on this soon, but we want to provide a really easy experience for people to deploy their applications in the first place. And obviously with LangServe, there's going to be seamless integration with LangSmith. So you can get everything that LangSmith has to offer out of the box with this hosted LangServe product. The last thing that I'll point out is we're working on enterprise features to support admin security needs of large teams. One thing that I alluded to earlier was permissioning. So for example, if you only want people to go in and access annotation queues to annotate your traces that you send to the annotation queue, this is something that would be possible with the RBAC model that we're working on right now.
And maybe a final question from the group, unless others write something into the chat in the last minute or two. A lot of questions on LangChain expression language. It seems like it's a bit newer for folks. How can LangSmith help with chain construction and visibility in LangChain expression language, and anything more you can comment on around LangServe?
Yeah, so if you build up a chain with LangChain expression language and you have the, I think I have an example in the docs that uses LangChain expression language. Oh yeah, here we go, LangChain. So this is LangChain expression language. It uses this pipe syntax that allows you to stitch different components together. So in this case, we have a prompt model output parser. This is like one of the simplest chains that you could build. And by default, all of this is logged to LangSmith. And actually, Chat LangChain is also built with LangChain expression language. So any of these traces that you see they show you the different steps of the LangChain expression language pipeline. So you'll get immediate visibility if you're using LCEL with LangSmith, and this allows you to get a good sense for what's happening at each step of the pipeline and make changes as needed. I'm not sure if that completely answered the question, but yeah, we have native support with LCL out of the box.
Yeah, maybe to add on because we have every LLM call can open up a playground, we'll keep track of all the previous state for where the chain has gotten to or where the agent has gotten to. So when you open up a playground call for a multi-LLM, a chain or agent that calls multiple LLMs, you'll be able to see what's been called previously, and we'll keep track of state. So it certainly helps helps as well. And then LangServe, that's source available. We do have a posted LangServe beta that you can reach out to me if you want to get access to at julia@langchain.dev, but that's not in GA yet. And I think we'll wrap there. Thank you all for joining. We're super excited for you to try out LangSmith, or if you've been using LangSmith. We really appreciate you, and feel free to give us feedback. Team ships very, very quickly, and we're always trying to evolve and get better. But it's a big day for us, and we appreciate all of your support and helping us get here. So I will hopefully see you all soon. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Julia. Thanks, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.